If you would turn to Mark chapter 8, and we'll be covering verses 1 through 10. And the title this morning, I gave the office the compassionate one, but in my notes, I titled it as Jesus the Compassionate. So it's basically the same thing. I just dropped the one for this morning. And I'll explain that in a minute. Jesus 8, 1 through 10. During those days, another large crowd gathered. Since they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for these people. They've already been with me 3 days, have nothing to eat. And if I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way because some of them have come a long distance. His disciples answered, But where in this remote place can anyone get enough bread to feed them? How many loaves do you have? Jesus asked. 7, they replied. He told the crowd to sit down on the ground. When he had taken the 7 loaves and given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. And they did so. They had a few small fish as well. He gave thanks for them also and told the disciples to distribute them. The people ate and were satisfied. Afterwards, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. About 4,000 were present. After he had sent them away, he got into the boat with his disciples and went to the region of Dalmanutha. Father, I ask that you would add your blessing to the reading of this word, and Lord, that we would once again see the real life correlation here and how we can apply it in our lives. And that our prayer would be for more of Jesus. In your holy name. Amen. As I read through the New Testament, I see a recurring theme here over and over in reference to Jesus. And it's not just the Messiah, it's not the Savior, it's not any of those. I see a recurring theme of compassion. He is constantly involved in other people's lives. And he's getting involved in the midst of their pain, their suffering, their hurt, and their need. When I was younger, I used to read a lot of fantasy books. And one of the things that the kings would do would knight someone and then give them a name based on their valor or something that stood out about their character. And so based on that, I was thinking, wow, how could Nerd Mike apply this to his life? And so it was Jesus the Compassionate. So if I was a king, and please, I'm trying not to be sacrilegious in any form or fashion, but if I were a king and Jesus was here and I was to knight him, it would be Jesus the Compassionate. Based upon what I know of him, what I know of his life, what I know about his character. So based on that concept of who Jesus is to me in this application, I want to share with you what I feel is pertinent to us. In these opening chapters of Mark, starting from Mark 1 to here in Mark 8, we find Jesus performing many, many miracles. He's healed many. He's fed 5,000 already, 5,000 men, and there were women and children that were there in addition to that. He has challenged the righteous on their attitudes and actions, and he's delivered people from demon possessions. That's all in the first 7 chapters alone. Last week I preached on Who Do You Say That I Am? This message could be included in that if I were doing a series on that. Because to me, Jesus is compassion. So when I ask that question, who is Jesus to me? Jesus is compassion. He sees the hurting and the lost, and he's moved to insert himself into those areas of struggling and suffering, into their lives. He's now in the area of Decapolis, and many have made a long journey to come and to hear him speak and to witness some of these miracles firsthand. I'm sure that they've heard much about him. I'm sure that the curiosity was piqued. I know that I would be if I was in that region at that time and someone said, hey, Jesus is coming. He's out in the desert and he's preaching and teaching. And have you heard about all the miracles that he's done so far? Come on, let's go see if he does something. I'd have been there. Why? Because I like to see things like that. I like to have a little excitement in my life. And so here's some excitement that was taking place in this region at this time. And so all of these people are traveling to come and to see Jesus and to hear him. Now, what is interesting is that it's also believed that this is the furthest part of Jesus' journeys that he has taken. So theologians and scholars believe that this is the furthest that he has traveled from his hometown. And many made that trip. It's in a region where Gentiles and Israelites came together. And so he made a long journey himself, and others were making long journeys also. Have you ever planned for a trip, though, thinking that you would only be gone for a day or two, but the plans changed or something happened, and now you were extending your stay? Has that ever happened to you? To the best of your abilities, you planned to be gone maybe 2 or 3 days, and something's happened. Car troubles, whatever. Kidney stone, you're stuck at the hospital for a couple of extra days. You just haven't planned for the what if. Well, I think this is what's happening here with these people. They've made a journey to see Jesus. They didn't plan on staying for 3 days, though. Our text tells us they were there for 3 days. So they had enough provisions for a day or two plus their trips. And so there they are with their families. And if their kids are anything like mine, they were hungry, irritated, tired, bored, and ready to go home. Back to their routines. But there was something there that compelled the adults to stay longer. Something about Jesus that had them awestruck and there to hear him, to plan, to make an extended stay that was unplanned. In a couple of my commentaries, it's believed that many of these people had not eaten for a couple of days because they found themselves in that circumstance of intending to stay for a day, but they couldn't bring themselves to leave. So what happens? Jesus realizes this, and he begins to encourage them to head home. In his conversations with his disciples, he says, I have compassion for these people. They've already been here 3 days. They have nothing to eat. And if I send them home now, they're going to go home hungry, and they'll collapse on the way. They won't have the strength for the journey. Some have traveled a long distance. Now, there are several sermons in this passage, but I just want to dissect this one for a moment. Jesus knew that they were hungry. He recognized their need. He knew they were in a weakened condition. There was something that kept him from sending them on that journey. And he was concerned for their well-being. What was going to happen? They were going to stagger, stumble, even perish on their way home. Jesus had spent 3 days with these people. There's no Taco Bell or Long John Silver's at this time. There's no convenience store to send the disciples to and say, hey, pick up some bottles of water and some loaves of bread and some sliced cheese when you're giving cheese sandwiches and water. There's nothing like that close by. The idea of fast food here would have been bread, dried fish, and whatever they could carry to drink. No markets. No towns even to go to. And these people have now been fasting for a couple of days. What happens when you fast for a day? You get hungry. I can miss a couple of meals, and by the third one, I'm starving, ready to eat. Not even a whole 24 hours. And so here are people that have maybe fasted for 3 days. And Jesus realizes these people are hungry. We have to do something about that. I have to do something about that. And he knew that this was going to be a sacrifice for the disciples. The disciples, he calls them together. What do you got? 7 loaves, a few fish. So now he's asking the disciples to give up their food too. How many of you would do that? I haven't eaten for 3 days, and then I break into my bag and bring out my bread and my fish. Man, it's going to be a fight if you try to get out of my hands. Because I like food. I like to eat. But these people were hungry. They wanted food. They wanted sustenance. But their desire for Jesus at this point was still overwhelming their growling bellies. He knew that many had that long trip to get back home. By going without food or drink, they were at a risk of not being able to survive the trek back. And he was worried about them. So he becomes proactive. And here he meets their physical needs. See, Jesus meets the physical, but he also supplies for the spiritual. So here he's meeting their physical need. They're hungry. They need to be filled. They need to have food so they can have the strength for the journey ahead of them. He could have just sent the disciples out to catch some fish, to look for someone in a village close by. That still could have been a day's journey. They could have made bread, but instead he chose to use the resources that were available. Besides, they didn't have enough money to feed the people. So even if they did have someplace close by, they didn't have enough money to feed 4,000 men, women, and children. So he asked the disciples, how many loaves of bread do they have? 7. 7 loaves for 4,000 people. And I wonder, after he's already fed the 5,000, those same disciples are there. So I'm wondering, after he fed those 5,000, I wonder if any of them, when he was asking for the loaves of bread here, were going, uh-oh, what's he going to do? And I'm sure there were some in there going, no, 7 loaves for 4,000 people can't be done. I'm sure there were others that were going, I bet you he can do it. And when you get a group of men together, it's always that way, right? Bet you can't do that. Sure I can. Bet you he won't. Bet you he will. And so here we have the disciples. They bring the loaves to him. Jesus takes the loaves. He turns to the crowd, tells them to sit down, and he blesses them. And he hands it to the disciples. Here, pass this out. See, when I see things like this, when I read about things like this in Scripture, I see this as the way that Jesus is deepening the faith of the disciples. Why? Because now they're active. They're part of the story, right? They could have been his disciples and sat there and just, okay, Jesus, that's great. You go ahead and feed them, and we'll just do whatever we have to do on the sidelines here. And Jesus is going, no, you're going to hand out that bread. You're going to distribute it to the people. And we're not going to form lines for them to come and get it. We're not going to ask them to go sit in this group and that group and, to send a representative. You are going to go feed those people. And something amazing happens. People didn't go home hungry. Scripture says they were satisfied. And the disciples picked up basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. Over and over and over again, we read about Jesus taking care of the physical needs of the people that he encountered. Mark 1, he heals Simon's mother-in-law and many others that had various diseases. In Mark 2, he heals a paralytic man. In Mark 3, he encounters a man with a withered hand, and Jesus heals him. Mark 5, Jesus raised Jairus' daughter from the dead, and the woman with the issue of blood that reached out and touched the hem of his garment was healed because of her faith. In Mark 6, he feeds over 5,000 and healed many more. And here we are in Mark 8, beginning of Mark 8, and he's sitting down and he's teaching, and all of a sudden he realizes these people need to go home. They've been with me 3 days. They're hungry. They're tired. They need to go home. So he had compassion for them. See, as I read through the text, and this is the reason why I would give him the name of the compassionate. Every time he met a hurting or struggling person, his heart went out to them. He loved them. And in Mark 8, we find one more instance of Jesus' compassion for those that were in need. Notice they weren't in want. Big difference here, right? I'm sitting there with a picnic basket full of food, and Jesus starts to hand out fish and bread. Is that a want or is that a need? Oh, Jesus is handing out the good stuff. I want fish and I want bread. I don't want the fruit that's in the basket. See, there's a big difference between our wants and our needs. Many of us have these huge wants, and we sacrifice our needs. There's so many times that our boys say, we're hungry, what do we got? And we tell them, I don't want that, I don't want that, I don't want that, I don't want that. What do you want? McDonald's? No, we're not going to McDonald's. That's a want, that's not a need. Are you hungry? And Emily and I are both like, well, when they get hungry, they'll eat. They get hungry enough to eat what we got. See, there's a huge difference. In America, we have so much. We've been blessed with so much. But there are still people who suffer for their basic daily needs. Jesus wants to minister to them. But how? How are we going to minister to them? It's not going to be by us sitting on the sidelines going, you go Jesus, and cheering them on. It's going to be us getting involved. You take this bread and you feed them. You take this fish and you feed them. Get your tool belt, go drive some nails. It's going to be us getting actively involved. And I don't mean just us as this congregation. I mean us as the church with the big C. How are we going to take care of those who are hurting, those who are in need, and who've never heard about Jesus? How are we going to take care of them if we don't go? I had a conversation with a couple of gentlemen the other day, and one of them said, you know, we tend to gather with like-minded people. I said, you know, you're right. And he goes, well, all three of us are educated, and here we are. We're having an educated conversation. I said, sure. He said, so here we are gathered together as like-minded people. I said, right. And I started to think about the implication of that. See, there are so many people around us that need to hear about Jesus. But we tend to reserve those conversations for those who are like-minded, right? So we go and we have dinner with people after church. We sit down, we have conversations about church and about God things and in spiritual aspects of things. Now, some of you are going, well, Pastor Mike's never come to lunch with us because we just want some conversation about the week. There are people around us that need to have that God conversation. And so that's like the bread. We come to church on Sunday morning, and Jesus puts half a loaf of bread in our hands, and he says, now, go and feed them. Uh-oh. Now he's talking about evangelism. There's a need. There's a need in our community. There's a need in our neighborhoods. There's a need in our schools and in our workplaces. And Jesus is asking us to be part of that. You see, in this passage of Scripture, in this area where he is at, it is believed that both Israelites and Gentiles are there. And we draw that conclusion from Mark 7. There's an interaction with Jesus and a woman that was Syrian Phoenician, Gentile. Her daughter is possessed by a demon. She asked Jesus to heal the little girl. And Jesus said to let the children eat first. Who are the children? The Israelites. Because it's not right to take the children's bread and to toss it to the dogs. The woman's response impressed Jesus. Even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. So she's saying, yes, I realize that you are here to give to the Israelites first. But I am just asking for a crumb, a morsel, a piece. And Jesus says, woman, your daughter is healed. Because of your faith. How awesome. You know, it seems pretty harsh that Jesus would speak that way about the Gentiles. Oh, they're the dogs. Children get fed first. You know, but in that culture, in that society, it's easy to understand why he says that. But the woman remained persistent. See, there are many times that I've asked myself, am I satisfied with crumbs when I'm hungry? On those days that I really want more of Jesus, on those days that I'm desiring more and more and more and more of him, am I happy with the crumb that I get from the table? Now, do I want a glass of milk? Would I love to have a nice thick steak? Absolutely. So if I had someone that invited me over for pork chops and mashed potatoes and green beans, and I get there and there's one green bean on my plate and a little scoop of mashed potatoes and part of the meat off a bone, I'm going to be a little disappointed. Why? Because I'm expecting a nice dinner, right? But this lady is saying, hey, you give me that and I'm going to be happy. I'm going to be satisfied. Give me the crumb, Jesus. See, there are many times that I've been too proud to accept the crumbs. There have been many times that I've looked for a fish sandwich and not the hush puppies or the crispy little things that you get at Long John Silver sometimes. I want something that gives me sustenance. I want something that fills me. And so I look for the big thing with Jesus. That I miss the little thing that He's working in my life. And I want you to think about that this morning. How many times have you missed the big thing? How many times have you missed the little thing because you were looking for the big thing? Well, Jesus, yeah, that's a good ministry to get involved with, or that's a good thing to do, but I really want to do this. I really feel like you're calling me to do this. See, the Gentile woman understood that Jesus was there first to fulfill prophecy and to bring salvation to the Israelites first. She may not have been able to connect all of that and to theologically explain that, but in essence, that is exactly what she said when she made the statement to Jesus. Why? Because her daughter was sick spiritually. It wasn't just a physical ailment. She recognized that there was something spiritually wrong with her daughter, and Jesus healed her. Why? Because of the faith of the woman that day. Not because of the lineage of their family, not because of the importance they were in the community, not because of their standing, but because of her faith. See, many of us bring our physical needs. Many of us bring Jesus our physical needs. My arthritis is acting up. My head hurts. My feet are killing me. Jesus, do something about that. So we bring in those physical needs. We're good about that. And to sharing those physical needs. And to ask Him to do things. But what about our spiritual needs? What is it that right now, if you were to have Jesus standing right in front of you, and spiritually speaking, He asked you, what do you need from me? What is it spiritually that you would say? Is it joy? Is it hope? Is it peace? Strength? Stronger will and determination to follow? What is it spiritually that you need? See, physically, like I said, we're great about saying, well, we need this and we need that. And sharing that. But spiritually, we're starving. Because we're not feeding the spiritual self. We're not putting food into our spiritual self on a daily basis, on a consistent basis. Now, some of you may be saying, you don't know what I do, and I do that. Great. I'm talking to the people that are like me, that struggle on a day-to-day basis. To feed myself. And pastors are the worst at that. Let me just share that with you. Why? Because we're so busy feeding other people and pouring into other people's lives that we forget to take time out for ourselves. That we don't sit down at the table and feed ourselves. That we don't ask for crumbs. So we come physically saying, Jesus, we need this in our body. You know, man, my arthritis is killing me today. I just need you to relieve that. Take care of that. What if He doesn't? What happens to our character? What happens to our spirituality? What happens to our spiritual self? Pain so bad and overwhelming that we become short with everybody that we're around. And they go, wow, you're really a Christian? Spiritually, we need to ask Jesus for more. To not be satisfied with just eating on Sunday morning. But to feed ourselves every day. So in closing today, I'm going to do something a little different. If you're hungry spiritually, and you feel that Jesus is looking at you and offering to satisfy you today, I'm going to ask you to come and pray. If you want me to pray with you, just make a little motion, look at me, make eye contact to come down here and pray with you. We're going to open the altars. And it's something that I should have been doing all along, church. And I apologize for that. But this morning, I feel that there are people in here that are struggling spiritually. I know I am. The devil is after me and after my family so many different ways. And I know that if he's after me, he's after you. Because if he's not, then you definitely need to be here, praying, seeking God. So this morning, as the ladies are coming to sing, as we're going to close here in a moment in prayer, I'm going to ask you all to stand. Make it a little easier for you. If you want to come and you want to pray, these altars are open. I'm going to invite you guys to come and spend time in the presence of Jesus. You just ask Him for crumbs. Ask Him to satisfy. Let's pray. Our Father, as we close out this service, I pray, God, that you would help us to be obedient to your leading. Father, as you are speaking to your people this morning, I pray for boldness, I pray for courage, and I pray, God, that you would satisfy today. Oh, Lord Jesus, that as you see the condition of our souls and our hearts, as we're starving spiritually, and you're standing there with the bread offering to feed us, Jesus, open our hands, extend our arms, and satisfy us this day. Lord, I know that sounds selfish. We need more of you. More of you in our lives. More of you in our homes, in our country. And so, Jesus, this morning I pray that your Holy Spirit would continue to speak and to move your children. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.